Let's talk about the 10 books I read in July. Hi, welcome back to my channel. In July, I read 10 books and I stuck to my TBR pretty well. I actually finished every book on my TBR, and I did make a video of me trying to finish the rest of my TBR in the last week of July. So be on the lookout for that because that was hard. Yeah, for pretty much the first time ever, I fully stuck to my TBR. If you watched my June reading wrap up, I told you what my July TBR was, and I stuck to that almost to a T. I think I read more books than what were on that, but I did finish every book that was on there, if that makes sense. I don't know. Let's just talk about what I thought of the books that I read in July. Maybe you can get some inspiration to read some of these books. I know a lot of these have been on my TBR for a while, so maybe you need the push that I needed to finally read them. Let's just get right into it. The first book that I read in July is going to be up here because I don't have the physical copy of it, even though I do plan on picking it up like ASAP because it just came out, and that was Birth of a Dynasty by Chinaza Bado. I loved this book. I ended up giving this book 4.75 stars. And the only reason I didn't give it 5 stars was because I listened to it as an audiobook. By the way, I received it as an ARC from NetGalley, and it was only an audiobook format. And I read it at the beginning of this month, but I think it just came out last Tuesday. I think it came out July 26th, and I'm definitely going to be picking this up and reading every other book in the series because I loved this. But like I was saying, the only reason I gave it 4.75 stars instead of 5 is because I listened to the audiobook, and that made it a little bit hard to follow. I fully believe that if I read the physical book, I probably would have gave it 5 stars. But because it was hard to follow, I wasn't extremely interested for some parts of it. But once I started to really understand what was going on and like knew who the characters were, oh my gosh, it was a perfect book. It was so good, so entertaining, so interesting. I could not stop listening to it. If you enjoy Game of Thrones, if you enjoy political intrigue in fantasy books, you should definitely read it. I was truly shocked by how much I loved this book. Birth of a Dynasty is the start of a thrilling epic fantasy trilogy centered around 3 families' fight for power in Akabulin, a land where magic is feared, giants are real, and prophecy holds sway. We shall not forgive, we shall not forget, we will have our vengeance. Okay, I'm not going to read the entire description, but basically there's 3 families that are all fighting for power in this land. And Mukuru goes undercover and lives in a disguise as a farmer's son in a small village until something dramatic happens. Someone shows up claiming to be who his real identity is, which is Mukuru of Mudata. The story picks up from there, and then also at the same time there is another storyline of another family that's fighting for power. That is Zecora's family, who I love Zecora, and Zecora ends up getting, something happens, and Zecora ends up getting invited to Prince Ephraim's palace. And eventually, Mukuru and Zecora start working together, and I'm not going to tell you how any of that happens, but I will say it is so interesting. It was so entertaining. I literally cannot wait for the next book, and I know it's going to be a long time from now, but I will be the first one reading it. I will go pick up my copy of Birth of a Dynasty this weekend, and then I will be reading it once the second book comes out because I truly loved this book, and I think everyone should read this book. It's everything you could hope for in a epic fantasy story. Okay, so my microphone died, and I hope you can hear me fine without it. But the second book I read was Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil. I read this as soon as I got it. I got it from Fairy Loot. I have the Fairy Loot edition. This is a book by V.E. Schwab that is a lesbian vampire. I thought it was like romantasy, but I think it was actually just fantasy. There is some romance in it, but not in the way you would expect, if that makes sense. But my thoughts on this book, I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. My take is that it was just too long. I just lost interest in it about a quarter of the way through, and then like it would draw me back in and then I'd lose interest. I think it just went on way too long, too much time passed that wasn't being just like sped over. Like it was like every single time of this vampire's life, who lived for a very long time, V.E. Schwab included every period. And in some of them she included in a really interesting way, and you know, something different happened, but for the most part it was just a lot of the same thing over and over, and I honestly just got very bored. Also, I really loved Maria's character, especially at the beginning, and as time went on I just lost a lot of interest in her. And I understand that's kind of the point, because if you know, like if you read the book, you know, like the heart situation, I understood why I stopped caring about her, and it made sense, but it also made the book less interesting, because by the end I didn't care what happened to her. I mean, like same with Lottie, I had the same situation where at the beginning she was very interesting. I really wanted to know what was going to happen, and then eventually I just stopped caring. I also just don't like Lottie's ending. I think that Lottie was too good for what happened to her and how she started behaving at the end. And again, same thing, I understand the heart situation, but it seemed a little bit lacking in her progression, where like Maria's made sense because she already was pretty cruel. She already didn't really care too much, whereas Lottie seemed to care so much that when she stopped actually caring but continued to act like it, just didn't seem to match up. Like I almost feel like it would have been better if she acknowledged that she stopped caring but was like not trying to portray that she still did. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know. I just don't think I enjoyed Lottie's storyline. I think I was interested in her, I cared about her, and then the way things ended for her just didn't really make sense in my head. And then another issue I had with this book is that I did not care about Alice at all. Not from the very beginning did I care about Alice. She was just so uninteresting. Every time it got to her plot or to her perspective, I just wanted to get through it, get over it. I wanted to get back to Maria. I didn't care. I just didn't care. And I think it may have a lot to do with the fact that it took place in the current time frame, and it just didn't match with the vibes of this book. So every time we went to that perspective, I just lost so much interest. Like it just pulled me out of the story in a lot of ways. Things I did love was the side characters. There was a lot of side characters throughout Maria's story that had a huge impact on who she became and how she behaved as a vampire. And I really loved those characters. I really loved the time that she spent with them. Those were the most interesting parts of the stories, because it was very boring when it was just, oh, and then she was a vampire for 100 years and she did this, and then she did it again for another 100 years. Like, I think all of that was explained too much, and we should have focused more on the times where she had people in her life and she wasn't just isolated. But yeah, I loved the side characters. I also really loved, especially at the beginning with Sabine and Maria, the feminine rage. I loved that aspect of this book. I really wanted to see more of that as the story went on, but it seemed like that just kind of vanished, as if her story didn't start with her being taken advantage of by men and held down by men. I wish she would have just maintained more of that rage. I also really enjoyed V.E. Schwab's writing. I think she writes in a very lyrical, beautiful way, and even though this story, I feel like it dragged on, I do think that her writing consistently kept me at least engaged enough to continue reading, even when I was bored. I just think she writes in such a beautiful way that I want to continue reading. I have to say, the Midnight Soil Rose metaphor was very interesting, and I don't know if there's any lore behind that or if V.E. Schwab just came up with that on her own, but I really loved the lyricism, is that a word? I just really love how beautiful that made this book, that metaphor and the poems that they use to represent themselves. I just think that was a beautiful way to have a distinction of themselves versus humans, and a way for them to feel as if they aren't the monsters that they are. So yeah, that's my takes on this. I didn't hate this book. I wouldn't reread it, but I would recommend it. So do with that information as you will. The next book I read, Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren. This book is a book that I know is so extremely loved by a lot of people, and I don't know how I went so long without reading it, but I am very happy that I did read it. I do understand why people love it so much. I gave this book 4.25 stars, and the reason it's not higher than that is because I hate the miscommunication trope. I hate it so much, and majority of this book is that. But I have to say that it was done in a very meaningful and realistic way. I was very annoyed by it throughout majority of the book, but then once the reason for the miscommunication came up, like once they finally communicated everything, it really did make sense why they wouldn't have had that conversation before. It made sense why Macy was guilty and distant and didn't want to talk about it. Like it really did all make sense, and that made it okay to me, but I still can't give it a higher rating because I was very annoyed by that for majority of the book. But this book is about Macy and Elliot, who meet when they're very young in a cabin that Macy's dad bought to bring Macy to. They loved books, they read together, they hung out, they were kids, and they just slowly fell in love. And it was such an adorable way for them to meet and to slowly fall in love. They explored each other together. They explored what love means. They explored what being in a relationship means. And I loved those scenes of seeing them in the flashbacks growing up together and growing in love together. And then something happens where they are separated. And about 10 years later, I think it's 10 years later, they meet again in different circumstances as adults, and they are rekindling their relationship, but this thing that separated them continues to stay a problem because they haven't ever had a conversation about it, and it just continues to grow as a problem between them. And when they finally do have that conversation, everything makes sense, and it will break your heart. It broke mine. I sobbed during that conversation. It was so heartbreaking, especially the way that it happened and how Macy kind of went on her own and had that moment before Elliot shows up. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. That part specifically had me bawling my eyes out. I think this was a really well-written book. It was just so sad. I just felt so sad for Macy. I wish I could give her a hug. She deserves the world. I love her so much. And I loved this book. I loved them together. I love the flashback scenes. I think the time in the cabin was so magical. It's like they were made for each other, and this cabin was made for them to find each other in. And they just needed each other. And I'm happy that they found each other, and I'm also happy they found their way back to each other. Yeah, I love that book. 4.25 stars. I'm so happy I finally read it. The next book I read was Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. I gave this book 4 stars. It's a YA romance book about Liz and Wes, who are neighbors, and they have always had this relationship where they just bicker and mess with each other, and Wes is always stealing her parking spot, and as teenagers that becomes their thing, just arguing over this parking spot. They strike up a deal for him to help her pursue her crush who just moved back to town. As part of this deal, Wes gets the parking spot for the time frame that it takes to complete this mission, I guess. And along the way, they fall for each other or realize their feelings for each other. And it was just a really cute book. I think the main reason it's not 5 stars for me or anything above 4 stars is just because it is YA and it was a little bit immature, and I think I've just grown out of that. Honestly, the only reason I read it is because I bought it and I didn't want it on my physical TBR anymore, and a lot of people have talked about how much they love it, and I completely understand that. It was a very adorable book and they were very adorable together, and I enjoyed reading it. I had such a good time. I just think I'm a little bit too old for it, which makes sense. I am an adult and this is for young adults, but yeah, I would recommend it. I think if you're looking for just a cute, fun, rom-com-y book, this is definitely the one. Okay, the next book I read was also an audiobook arc from NetGalley, and it'll be right here because I don't have a physical copy, even though I think it just came out, which is Cruel Summer. I gave this book 3.5 stars. I have a lot of opinions on this book. It follows Sam throughout the course of a summer after her husband has proposed that they see other people. So he's not asking for a divorce, but he is asking to see other people. And she is obviously against that. They are high school sweethearts who have a beautiful life together. They have 3 grown kids and they've had a very happy, successful life and marriage together. She is very thrown off guard by this question or by this request, and her friends kind of push her to explore this and accept this because at least he didn't cheat on her. And that turns into her going no contact with her husband for a full summer while they both do whatever they want. And her idea is that they will come back together at the end and realize that this is what they want. However, she ends up going on road trips in vintage cars with her husband's best friend, because that's what he does for a living. He restores vintage cars. And during this time, she's forced to explore and acknowledge and be honest with herself about her feelings and her thoughts and the reality of her life and her relationship. And I will say that I really loved the setting and premise of this book. I think that the vintage cars, road trippy summer thing was a very interesting way to progress the storyline. And I also really love the ending. I love that her husband was stupid enough to request something like that and then got the ending that he did. I think it was very much deserved, and it was very satisfying to read. Yeah, if it's not clear, I hate her husband. I really hate how he made that request in the way that he did, as if he was such a good person and loving husband and he didn't want to lose her, but he just wants to explore other options. To me, that was giving, I want my cake and I want to eat it too, and I don't care about your feelings because whatever. I didn't like that. I really did not enjoy that. I also really hated how her friends kind of reinforced this idea that he wasn't a bad person for that. I mean, yeah, maybe he wasn't a bad person, but if you want to see other people, ask for a divorce. Don't ask me to sit here and be okay with you seeing other people while we're still together. Like, you can't have it both ways. You can have me or you can have them. You can't have both. So yeah, I don't like that her friends reinforced that that was like okay and that she should be okay with that. And also, I just really felt bad for her, for Sam, during that time, because that wasn't fair for her to have all these conflicting emotions and feel like she was in the wrong for feeling upset by that conversation. And that's why I like that Logan was like one of the only people to be real with her and express that that wasn't okay and she's allowed to feel the things she's feeling. And I also liked Logan throughout the remainder of the story, where he forces her to come to terms with her feelings or the reality of her situation, or to be honest with herself. I think that the introspectiveness of their relationship was a interesting part of their relationship, and I enjoyed it until he wasn't ready to do the same thing. And then I didn't like him either. But yeah, overall, I think this was a good book. I think that it ended in a very satisfying way, and I did like Logan. I think he just did a few things that really made me mad, but I am happy for how it ended. And I also have to say, if you're gonna listen to this book, It was a good audiobook, but I did not enjoy listening to the smut scenes. I have no problem with smut. I don't mind reading smut. I don't want to listen to it, especially these ones. For some reason, they just seemed really worse than normal smut scenes, but hey, it's up to you if you want to listen to it or not. But yeah, I think the characters were very real, very raw, and overall it was a good book. 3.5 stars. I wouldn't read it again, but I would recommend it. It was a good book. Okay, the next book I read was also an ARC I received through NetGalley, and I'll put it here because I also don't have it. I loved this book. This book is Fallen City by Adrienne Young. It doesn't come out until November 4th, which is heartbreaking to me because that means the next one doesn't come out for probably like another year and a half after that, and that is horrible because I love this book and I need the next one immediately. This book has a lot of political intrigue. It is set in a city where the political atmosphere is already kind of crumbling. Two of the children of this city, they're not children, they're adults in the story, but as children they meet and fall in love. One of them the child of a important person within this political sphere, and the other one is the nephew of another important person in this political sphere. They are kind of on opposite sides of the politics in this city, and they fall in love anyways, and they kind of have this dramatic plan for how they're going to change the system. But then something happens where one of them goes off course and takes another route, actually accidentally starts a revolution within the city. And then that's how these two people that are in love with each other and had a lot of plans for their futures together end up on opposite sides of a war. And it is a very interesting book. I will say I gave it 4.5 stars. I don't know if I mentioned that. The only reason I gave it 4.5 stars is because I don't love how the time jumps were happening. I think they happened too often, and it was very confusing at the beginning because I didn't understand why these two characters matter or why I was going from one perspective to the other, and their relationship to each other wasn't expressed until a little bit later in the book. Once I did understand their relationship to each other, that's when I got super interested in the book. But yeah, so this follows Maris and Luca, and they're on two separate sides of the war, but they're in love with each other, and to protect each other they actually have to stay on separate sides of the war. I just think this was a very interesting book. I think that the political intrigue was top tier. Their love and their connection to each other was so good. I love them together, and I can't wait to see more of them together. Or honestly, I don't know where their story's going, and I mean, this man yearns. He yearns for Maris, but he has to do what he can to protect her, and that actually means staying away from her, which is insane. Another thing about this book was there are some angry gods that are kind of controlling things and pulling the strings, and I don't know about anyone else, but I love when there's like gods that are controlling things in some interesting ways, and you know, there's fate involved, and I just really enjoyed this book. And I think if you like books with political intrigue, this is a really, really good one. And yeah, mark your calendars. I think it's November 4th, I said. I will definitely be there to pick up my physical copy of this book because I really, truly loved this book. The next 3 books are books that I read because they were on my TBR, but I actually probably wouldn't have gotten to them, except I was forcing myself to finish my TBR for probably the first month ever. I really stuck to my TBR. And so this book specifically, which is What Kind of Paradise by Janelle Brown, I probably never would have actually gotten to this book on my own. I am a huge mood reader, and this isn't the kind of book that I would just want to pick up. I probably would have picked up probably anything else besides this, but I was determined to actually complete my TBR, and that meant that I had to read the book that I said was on my TBR last month. I'm realizing I had a really good reading month. A lot of these are very highly rated, and this one included is 4.5 stars. I loved this book. This book follows a girl, Jane, growing up in Montana in the mid 1990s with her father, who kind of is very controlling and weird at times. He forces her to learn how to be very independent, how to live off the land, how to survive without access to pretty much any technology or anything. And then it gets, by the way, this is a psychological thriller. It gets very weird, and she ends up becoming an accomplice in one of her father's very extreme crimes. She ends up going off on her own to somewhere she's never been. I mean, she has never been anywhere besides really her cabin in Montana. So she is very unexperienced in the real world. She knows nothing about it. But she decides to go to San Francisco, where her mother supposedly died, and starts her own life there with her father's crime kind of following her and affecting her in a lot of ways, on top of her having no idea what the world outside of her Montana cabin is like. And she faces a lot of internal conflict of dealing with her attachment to her dad. All she knows is her dad, and her dad's approval and opinion of her kind of means everything to her because that's all she knows. And she really struggles with, does she turn her father in? Does she go back to him because that's her home? Does she continue to lie for him and cover up for him? Or does she, she struggles a lot with like the morality of her decisions. She struggles a lot with learning how to live outside of isolation. She struggles a lot with her conflicting feelings about the stuff her dad has taught her and what real life is actually like. I loved this book. I was not expecting to love this book, but I listened to the audiobook for most of it. And this book forced me to think, like to really think about life and what is normal. It almost makes you feel slightly empathetic for her dad, who is a criminal and he commits horrific crimes, but you start to kind of understand why he does them and why he thinks they're okay. And I'm not saying I agree with them or think they're okay, but I can see why Jane struggles with seeing him for the criminal that he is, because she has been brainwashed to believe that he has real reason to do the things he's doing. And I also feel bad for him in a lot of ways because he also thinks he has real reasons to do the things he's doing. And he was a horrible, horrible human being, don't get me wrong, but it really does make you think about life and the progression of technology and the progression of things that take away from human nature or human experiences. Yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.5 stars. I think it was a very well written book, and it was also a take on the Unabomber from a different perspective. And I think it was done really, really well. Yes, I definitely recommend this book, and I would also reread this book because to read it from the beginning, knowing what you know at the end, I think would be very interesting. Okay, the next book I read, finally, was The Women by Kristen Hanna. This book has been on my TBR for a very, very, very long time, but I've been afraid to read it because I knew it was gonna hurt emotionally, and I was right, it did. I cried a lot while reading this book. By the way, this is a book about what a woman's experience during the Vietnam War would have looked like, or did look like, for a lot of women. And a lot of women during the Vietnam War did go to Vietnam and did play a very crucial, important role in the war, and yet were not given any acknowledgement for it at all. The Vietnam War veterans anyways had a hard time getting acknowledgement or getting a welcoming, kind acknowledgement for their service, but especially the women, who really didn't even get acknowledged for being there at all. I think that this was a very beautifully written book about what women in Vietnam experienced, and it was so heartbreaking. I loved Frankie and I loved Frankie's friends. I just really enjoyed the war times scenes. I know that's weird to say, but her growing in her strength and her confidence in herself and her ability to handle what she needed to handle and her ability to persevere through some of the hardest days ever and her ability to find happiness in even the worst times. I just thought that was all so beautiful, and you know, her friends that she made there really played a role in that, and I just really enjoyed that part of the book. But once she got home, it was really hard to continue enjoying and seeing as realistic. So I did originally give this book 5 stars, and then as I continued to think on it, I ended up lowering it to 4.75, only because if you've read this book, I think you will know what I'm talking about, but it felt like Kristen Hanna researched this war and then put in every single possible scenario and put it on Frankie. Like, Frankie experienced what every single person may have experienced. Like, she experienced every one of those things. And I think that was realistic. I think that there was a lot of that one person could have gone through in this war. Then it came to a point where it was like too much, specifically with her love interests. If you know what I'm talking about, something that happened once was already kind of unexpected or not likely, but then it happened to her 2 times. And then everything else, like all of the aftermath of the war, like how that would affect someone mentally. Yes, very realistic, but she got every single possible symptom, the word? I guess, symptom, like PTSD. And she got all of those things, where her friends that were also in the same war maybe got 1 or 2. And I think it would have been better if some of those were dispersed amongst the other characters and not all piling on to Frankie. I think it still would have been just as tragic and just as emotional if only a few of those things happened, if that makes sense. But overall, I just really loved this book. I loved how informational it was for me. I didn't know a lot about the Vietnam War, and I feel like I do know a lot more now, especially the way the veterans were perceived in our country, and that makes me very sad. So overall, I'm very happy I read this, and 4.75 stars, I definitely recommend it, but I do think it was slightly unrealistic in some ways. The next book I read was Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garman. I gave this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed the characters in this book. I think Mad was just so adorable and so smart, and I just love how she was written. I don't enjoy usually how children are written in books, but since she was so particularly special, being the child of 2 extremely smart, interesting, kind of quirky people, I think it was just very well done, and I think she was the highlight of this book. I loved Elizabeth and Calvin. I loved their relationship. They were just very made for each other and very similar in very different ways, and I think they were just so cute, and it was very, you know, what happens in this book is sad. It definitely makes for a good story. I think Elizabeth was so inspirational in her feminism, especially for the time period. She was just such a strong woman, and I just loved how such a serious story was written with such a quirky, funny undertone. And also, I loved 630. 630 was such an interesting character. He added so much more to the story. That is exactly what I mean by quirky, funny undertones, because while such a important scene is happening, or just the whole book is it's a very serious topic if you think about it, but it was just done in such a funny, interesting way, and 630 was a huge reason why that was even possible. I mean, a dog that smart with his own thoughts that are portrayed that way was I just loved it. I do think that it was a little bit boring at first, And also the rowing storyline, while I understand it, especially at the end, like who she is, and it's just like it's an important part of her character that she's like willing to do something like that and be good at it, like persevere at it. But I just didn't enjoy it at first. I thought it was so weird to even introduce that to the story. And I also think that, similar to the women, it was a little bit unrealistic how many people were just out to get these two characters, like Calvin and Elizabeth. Okay, yeah, you can be hated in your job and they might treat you differently and stuff like that, or you know, this person might hate you and treat you a certain way, but it seemed like everyone was against them, everyone was out to get them. Like, some of the storylines just were very unrealistic, especially with like how many people directly sabotaged them. It was just weird. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I loved the ending, I loved the characters, and I definitely recommend it. You should definitely give this book a try if you haven't and it's on your list. Okay, the last book I read was extremely disappointing. Everyone recommends this book, Flawless by Elsie Silver. It's part of the Chestnut Spring series. I'm going to continue the series, and I am making a video with all of my thoughts, unfiltered, full spoiler video of the whole series. But this book was so disappointing. Everyone recommends this series as if it's like the best series ever written. And you know, I trusted it. I was super excited to get into my cowboy romance era, and you guys misled me. You misled me. This was not what I was expecting. I was expecting, you know, like Southern charm, hospitality, like, you know, full gentleman, masculine cowboy energy. And I got a crybaby. He's a crybaby. He is too emotional. He can't control his feelings or his thoughts or he just has all of these crazy outbursts. Okay, hold on. I gave this book 3 stars. I think it was entertaining. I read it in 2 days. I was entertained, okay? I'll give it that. And also, by the end, I think that their connection was... By the way, this is just a cowboy romance about a bull rider, famous bull rider, and the daughter of his sports manager. That's pretty much the whole story. They are working together. She's the boss's daughter, and they fall in love. There's a little bit of forced proximity. There's a one-bed scene, one-bed trope, and, you know, all the things that you would think would make up for a great book. But it was not great. It was average. It was painfully average. It was entertaining, easy to read, but the male main character was so annoying. He was such a crybaby. He could not take a joke, but he could dish them out. That's like my least, not even books aside, characters aside, I hate people that can dish jokes out, but they can't take them. The second a joke is directed at them, it's like serious and the world's ending and they're so upset, and how could you say that because this happened to me? I don't care. If you can't take a joke, then don't joke with people. Okay. I'm thinking I'm gonna lower my rating because I'm clearly very worked up over this book. No, I'm not gonna lower it. I enjoyed Summer's character. I think she was very strong, interesting. You know, she tried her best to do the right thing. By the end, I did enjoy them together. I think that they did eventually form a real connection. But one of my biggest criticisms is that this was like a very lustful connection at the beginning. I didn't see it as either of them really seeing each other for anything more than like sexual pleasure. Every time he thought about her, spoke about her, it always came from a place of her lips, or how she looks, or her body in those pants, or stuff like that, rather than how interesting she is, how smart she is, how strong she is, how much she's gone through, and how their connection is so like... The connection wasn't really based in anything besides sexual attraction, especially at first. And even as it progressed into something more, that was still always the first thing that was stated, was like her lips versus how smart she is. Like, I just feel like that never really changed, even though they did grow a real connection. their main first connection was lustful. And I just don't love stories like that. I would prefer a real, genuine, emotional connection before the lustful connection is developed. And then, if you've read this book, you know she tells him something very secret and important, and he swears not to share that information. Now, he's a very protective person of her, and I really do like that. I do like that protectiveness until you can't control yourself and you share her secrets in the most fucked up way possible in front of everyone she cares about, and she hasn't even told them herself yet. That was so wrong, and I would have never forgiven him for that. So Summer is a better person than me, but I just think that was very unrealistic, and no one would have forgiven him for that. He was just very childish, immature, dramatic, and a crybaby, and I didn't like him, but I did like Summer, and eventually their connection was okay, and it was entertaining. So 3 stars. Wouldn't recommend. I'm looking forward to the rest of the series because the other characters that have been introduced, I think they're gonna have a lot more of what I would like to read about than what this did. So I'm looking forward to that, but this book was painfully average. Sorry. Hoping the rest of the series is a lot better because I am gonna continue. But yeah, that's all I have to say about that. And that is every book that I've read this month, which for me, that's a lot of books in 1 month. That was 10 books. And this coming month, I'm actually not gonna do a very intense TBR because I think I need a little bit of a slower month after that month. So obviously on my TBR for this month is the rest of this series. Maybe not all of it, maybe I'll spread them out a little bit, but that is on my TBR. And then also, because I just want to soak up the rest of summer, I want to read, I've read both of the Abby Jimenez Part of Your World series. I read 2 out of 3 of them. I think the last one is Just for the Summer. So I kind of want to read that. So that's on my radar. And then Jessa Hastings' new release, Time of Your Life, that's also on my radar. And beyond that, I don't really have TBR, but I do have my TBR jar and cart right there. And I just made that this month. It's actually my last video if you want to go watch it. But I am probably gonna do a video where I read off of my TBR jar. So that's pretty much my TBR for the month. Yeah, I think that was a great reading month. I had a lot of very highly rated books and great books, and a lot of books that I think you should probably read. I'm looking forward to my last summer reading month, and I will be back next month with a reading wrap up of all the books I've read in August. So yeah, if you've read any of these books and you like them, dislike them, have any thoughts on them, please comment them down below. I'd love to hear. And let me know what books you plan to read this month. Thank you so much for watching. This was such a fun time. Bye!